Socialism is defined by the dictionary as a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Simply put, it advocates for the abolishing of private property while giving the profits of each business to a social and economic structure. Socialism was first introduced in France during the French Revolution in 1789. Though it has been depicted for centuries through ancient texts of India and Greece, it was made popular by a little friend of ours, the USSR. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was first run by Vladimir Lenin, then Joseph Stalin. These bad boys of socialism used the economic standard to rain terror on its people by limiting free speech and controlling the aspect of how people live. So why is the word socialism being pinned to American politicians? The short of it? Fear. Many people use the term socialism to describe behavior in which a government takes on a larger role in the economy. For example, many opponents claim that President Barack Obama is a socialist because he takes the position that the government should be involved in many aspects of people's lives, and because he believes that people have a shared responsibility to each other. The term is very rarely used accurately. Obama was as far from a socialist as any other president. He did not act under the guise of socialism. He did not enact any policies that were socialist. He simply tried to make Medicare affordable with a public option next to the private market. There's a lot of reasons from Republicans as to why he's a socialist, but none of those arguments are based in fact, just bad faith. But that wasn't even the real reason why they labeled him a socialist. According to socialist view, individuals do not live or work in isolation, but live in cooperation with one another. Furthermore, everything that people produce is in some sense a social product, and everyone who contributes to the production of a good is entitled to a share in it. Society as a whole, therefore, should own or at least control property for the benefit of all of its members. That doesn't sound like an Obama policy, so why are we talking about it? Because that horrible S word has come to haunt us again. That brings us to Bernie Sanders. Bernie is a self-identified democratic socialist. He has led the way as far as social policies go in America, with Medicare for all, free community college, free childcare, and a progressive agenda for climate change. He has made casual conversation topics of the most feared social programs. So when will Bernie begin his socialist takeover? Well, stuff that thought in the back of your head. Socialism is off the table. Not a single candidate running for president is a socialist. There's not a single person demanding all private property be abolished. No one is calling for an end to the private market, and no one is demanding a universal income cap. No one is socialist. So what is really happening? Why does any of this matter? Propaganda. Propaganda is why this is happening, and propaganda is why we should care. We have a candidate running on a new idea, democratic socialism. As defined by the dictionary, a political movement advocating a gradual and peaceful transition from capitalism to socialism by democratic means, or a democratic welfare state that incorporates both capitalist and socialist practices. The first provides insight to the history of how socialism has been used to transition power between authoritarian regimes. The second definition has a more modern affiliation, showing that the socialist part of a democracy is allowing more power to the people, ensuring positions on company boards that represent the common employee, ensuring things like Medicare and fairly priced medicines, things like free childcare, free college, and restructuring our lobbying laws so that corporations can no longer write our legislation, ensuring every citizen has one vote and that no one person can influence legislation more than representatives and the people they're supposed to represent. Democratic socialism generally refers to collectively owned businesses and forms of government in which workers and government entities have more control over the means of production and distribution of goods, versus the private ownership and free market that drives capitalism. Democratic socialists believe that both the economy and society should be run democratically, to meet public needs, not to make profits for a few. Here's an example of how democratic socialism brings power to the working class. When the board of your company meets, there would be an employee sitting there specifically hired to bring low-level employees' interests to the table. Essentially, they are an HR rep whose job is to truly rep humans and the resources they require to complete a job. The board is then forced to consider how their decisions will affect everyone in the company, not just themselves. Things like wage increases will be considered more. Room for growth will become a common topic. How the company operates will be under the influence of those who keep it running at a local scale, not just those who benefit from profits the most. Have you ever had a need at work that no matter what you do, you cannot seem to get corporate to listen to you? And let me be clear, not get them to subvert to your will, but literally just get them to listen. Many companies admire the idea of leadership, but are not tuned to listening to those who have not made a name for themselves on an executive level. We have all been ignored by an employer, and democratic socialism will give you more power in negotiating fair terms for employment. This kind of thinking is not a socialist takeover. It is simply inclusion. The inclusion of everyone. So why am I being told to fear programs that are aimed to benefit the American people? First and foremost, these plans are expensive. Bernie has released on his website how he plans to fund each one of his policies, yet no one can stop asking him how we're going to pay for it. Over the grand scheme of things, we're projected to spend over $60 trillion in the next 10 years unless we change something. Well, if we already know how the policymakers claim to pay for it, then who were the people who started running campaigns to make it seem like we can't afford it? Millionaires and billionaires. Many top right-wing politicians and executives have gone out of their way to share their woes with the world, almost exclusively on news outlets. News outlets that many of these millionaires and billionaires own or have invested in. They are forecasting the end of the world under socialist Sanders' Green New Deal, like they did during FDR's New Deal back in the 40s. Anyone who knows American history can tell you the most economic growth in our country took place during the socialist years of the FDR administration. In fact, FDR's socialist policies seemed to resonate with the working class more than anything. They were coming out of the Great Depression, and people could see very clearly who the people on top truly wanted to help, and the people demanded change. They used their vote to demand change. The only reason we have term limits for the presidency was because FDR won 4 times in a row because of his very popular socialist policies. Those policies included Social Security and minimum wage. FDR was labeled a socialist for these policies that are staples in today's modern economy. Were either of these policies socialism? Did either of them lead to socialism? At the end of it all, FDR revitalized the economy by supporting the working class so that they too could participate in a booming economy. Now, I'm sure part of you has thought to yourself, how can we trust that socialism won't take over? I'd hate to break the news, but socialism has been alive and well in the US for decades. We have allowed business owners and politicians to work with each other directly to get their personal interests represented on the national stage at the sake of the people's well-being and tax revenue. CEOs are making on average 940% more than they were in 1978. On top of that, they were just subject to the largest tax breaks in history, $1.5 trillion, and they still didn't revitalize the economy like they said they would when they were asking for them. They just bought back tons of their own stocks to increase board member and investor return. For the first 3 quarters of 2018, stock buybacks went up 52%. That's $583 billion worth of money going back into investor and executive pockets. And just to keep politicians on the side of big business, election campaign contribution limits are indexed to inflation. This means that the amount of money you can legally donate to a campaign raises every 2 years. Yet, increasing minimum wage has been labeled as socialism, even though it has been the longest period in history without raising it. At the end of the day, the rich continue to help each other out. This is clear through the way our military funnels money to the top generals and the businesses they have stake in. John Kelly left the administration and is now making bank off the concentration camps on the border, a program he helped Trump and Pence set up on the border to deter immigrants, while he was acting chief of staff in this administration. It was also clear when we let banks play around with billions of dollars in 2008 and we had to give them $700 billion. At the end of all the bank buyouts, we were left wondering how much money we actually gave them. At first, the Federal Reserve refused to give the public the receipts for the bank buyout. It wasn't until a progressive senator led Congress to order the release of the receipts. That senator was Bernie Sanders. The Fed then dumped 25,000 pages of raw data. The Fed claimed the cumulative spending added up to about $7.7 trillion. That's $7.7 trillion. Money that we haven't seen and will never see thanks to those who toppled our economy playing with their bank connections. There's a deeply intensive report I came across that was written in 2011 and it has a wider range of understanding thanks to the years passing. This reports a total receipt of $29 trillion. So why is it we can give trillions to bank executives when they won't work to even raise wages? Or increase paid vacations? Or increase benefits? Or keep their money in America instead of tax havens? Why must the American people miss out on things like free healthcare and free education at the sake of CEOs' new salary and stock buybacks? It's because the rich do not want to lose their revenue. The very same people who are running attack propaganda against Bernie are the ones who have the most to lose. They cannot stand the idea of the money their employees earn for them being put into a system that will benefit literally every person in the United States. The rich take care of each other. They will do everything they can to unite against us and spread propaganda about candidates and their ideas. They will make sure we do not trust the candidates, one another, or the system, so that they can hand the election to someone like Trump or Bloomberg, who have both spent record amounts of money funding their campaigns. We are witnessing exactly what we were warned about for years: class warfare. The rich are in favor of policies that will keep them rich. Tax breaks, subsidiaries, bank deregulations, unstoppable rent prices, and things like the most expensive Medicare in the world. That is what they are fighting for. Not because they believe in it, but because they made investments. They see their businesses and portfolios as more important than society, than the American people. They continue to say that things will get worse under a new plan, but absolutely refuse to offer any kind of policy that will help 99% of this country. These people don't want free healthcare because the taxes will be too much. Fine. Then what do they have to offer? We have only seen increases in cost across all markets. Insurance is up. Tax rates are higher for the poor than they are for the rich. Wages are stagnant. Jobs are paying less and less. People are being forced out of their companies so they can build new warehouses and employ robots. Medicare is at an all-time high and keeps rising. And insulin costs more than a new Nintendo Switch. Thousands of people will be buying a Nintendo Switch worth of medicine every week. The rich have absolutely no solutions. They just don't want you to notice who will truly be paying for these programs. It's them and their companies. Socialism is a scare tactic. It is propaganda at full blast. I was trying to find an example of propaganda this election cycle and was literally handed one yesterday by a coworker. A letter from Mitch McConnell. Mitch decided he couldn't sit idly by and sent my company this letter. It's not worth your time. Just listen to Fox News for one news cycle and you've heard all of it. Again, not a single solution was presented in this letter, just things I should fear. That, and he asked for my money 4 times. The most ironic part of this to me is that right-wing advocates are begging for us to fight socialism that'll take our money and pool it together for programs that'll benefit the majority of Americans, by begging for social funding so they can pool it together for programs that will keep them in position to manipulate the few programs we have. So what now? Socialism is already in America. You just need to have a huge bank account to participate. Republicans in the current administration are lying through their teeth about policies written by other candidates and then focus on legislation that'll have the complete opposite effect of what they promise. Democrats are fighting as hard as possible to get people in the center lane so they can save their donors from having to finally pay the billions in taxes they've gotten away with for decades. They are all scared. And they should be. The American people deserve more than a few 100,000 people ruling over the few 100 million. This kind of regime is exactly what the rich are screaming about on live television. Projection at its finest. Bernie Sanders is not a socialist. It is the goal of corporations and Wall Street-backed politicians to make you fear him. It is their goal to make his name as divisive as Trump's. If we aren't fighting each other, then we will stop and take notice to who has kept the poor for this long. Bernie is subject to the most propaganda in history. Bernie has believed and advocated the same things for decades despite constant attacks. He has given his speeches on empty Senate floors and he has held rallies holding 27,000 people. Every time his message is the same. Get money out of politics and give the power back to the people. It's about compassion. That's not socialism, that's the will of the people. And we will take our country back from the rich.